Okay, so we're going to take this guitar, play it through this amp, these settings, through this speaker, and here's what the room sound looks like. Now that is basically conversation quiet. You can talk over that in the room. So what's the trick? How do we do it? Okay, so you probably noticed sitting on top of the amp in the background, a box with a blue flashing light on it. That box is a reactive load. It appears to the amplifier as though it's a speaker cab. It presents the correct sort of impedance curve so that the amp actually pushes signal out to it correctly, but it doesn't make any sound other than a bit of whirring and buzzing and humming. So we've got a line out, and that is feeding into this, which is an Electro-Harmonix 44 Magnum. It's a guitar pedal sized power amp. There are lots of others on the market, a lot of them better specified than this one, but this is something that I happen to have in my kit bag, which I can use with a pedal as an emergency amp setup in case anything goes wrong on a gig. As I've got it, I thought I would carry on and use it. And this is the thing that's actually pushing the signal out into my real speaker cab. Now, this is solid state, but that doesn't matter because my valve amp is seeing a proper reactive load. My speakers are still going to do the frequency filtering job that they are meant to do. So all this has to do is take a signal, push it out there, and make it loud enough to hear. The beauty of it is, though, that I don't really care what the power amp I'm using sounds like. So I've got no interest in turning it up to make it sound better. I can turn it down to the level where it's absolute minimal, and that's why I can then play with cranked up Marshall JCM 800 at a conversation level in a room. The reactive load takes all the signal from the amp quite safely. And of course, because at this point we're at line level, you can run your signal out into a suitable effects unit and add post power amp reverb and delay and anything else you fancy. And then reamp back up to the point where it can be anything I wanted it to be. Now, the other thing about this is that if I wanted to, I could plug my 5-watt amp into this and turn it up and get it louder than it would originally go, which is kind of quite useful and flexible. And of course, you're sitting there thinking, isn't that what a Fry-Out power station does? More or less, yep. The Fry-Out power station puts it all in one box. It's neat, it's elegant. It's got a tube power amp in it. But as I already had a reactive load and didn't really want to go out and buy another one, and as I'm quite happy to keep my passive electronics and my fancy stuff, my active stuff, in separate boxes, at some point, if I want to upgrade this, I can simply go out and buy a better power amp. Okay, once again, this guitar, this amp, these settings, this time no speaker. Instead, we're going to use the cab sims that are loaded into this Ampero 2 stomp box, which seems to be becoming an increasingly essential part of my everyday life. So here's the on-screen editor, can load up an empty patch, and we've got a couple of options for speakers. We've got model cabs, we've got impulse responses, and one of the things that really attracted me to this unit in the first place was it actually comes preloaded with licensed Celestion IRs, which are what I use a lot of in the studio anyway, so I was really happy to have that. And then, of course, we can add further processing, so maybe a little bit of reverb. What should we try? A bit of hall, a bit of plate? Let's try a bit of plate. And that's round about the perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, of technology moving on with time. When I first got my reactive load, I used it exclusively plugged into a computer running software cab sims. When I wanted to be able to run without having to fire up the PC every time, I tried using a guitar EQ pedal with a curve kind of set to look a little bit like a speaker response curve. It's not perfect, but it did a job. I then got a dedicated IR pedal. It's very basic. It's got about a dozen slots on it, and it's got a knob on the top with numbers against it. I keep a post-it note stuck on that to tell me what IRs I've got in each slot, because there's no display that tells me any of that. But you know what? It's basic, but it still works. Move on to something like the Ampero 2, and you've suddenly got a color touchscreen. You've got an on-computer editor. It's extremely flexible. If you have something like a universal audio box, you get all of this stuff built into one convenient box. But of course, what you do is you have the reactive load and then you have the digital component. Just as earlier on we looked at having the reactive load and then the reamping component of something like the Fryette. I am a great believer in, if you have kit lying around that you think you can use, give it a go, see what you can do with it. Quite a while back, I purchased my Sir Reactive Load. It's a great piece of kit, but I also have a much older THD hot plate. That's a resistive load. It doesn't sound as good, but it will take the output from an amp and turn it into a line level signal. So I can still do these things with it. And even though it doesn't sound as good, it still sounds good enough to use. Sometimes we have to step away from doing direct comparisons and just say, is this usable? Is it convenient? Does it do something that I want it to do? Right. In the next and final video in this series, we're going to have a look at pulling back from tubes altogether. As we're sitting at the moment looking at quite significant increases in prices of tubes and just difficulty in getting hold of them, it's maybe not a bad idea to get an understanding of some of the alternative things that we can do that can just make our guitar playing more convenient and actually rein in the costs so that we can not worry about this stuff. So next time out, the non-tube version of tube taming. I do hope these videos are useful to you. If they are, maybe think about giving us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to get notified when new stuff comes along. If you've got any questions that I may be able to help with, drop me a line. I'll be delighted to have a go at answering them. So until next time out, I'm Andy Picker. Look after yourselves, be good, and I'll see you then.